I think an extra dimension of this is saying no and turning things down
Mm.
and trying to identify the things that are good to say to do versus the things that are extra. And that's where the advice of a senior colleague or a mentor can be tremendously important. It hits all three areas: research, right? Which kind of projects are ones that are going to turn out to be productive and have a good outcome versus which ones will just sort of spin into nothingness, right? Well, teaching, how can you improve your teaching now so you don't have to invest as much in worrying about it and in trying to fix it later by things like visiting, getting colleagues to help you out. And service, what kinds of things should you accept? What kinds of things should you not accept? There's a whole pretty detailed literature on that I've worked a lot with lately. So I think a big part of the efficient, I would spin that as being very selective about what you decide to do and where to spend your time in these areas. So
Yeah, thank you. Jennifer, can you give, and I don't want to put you on the spot, feel free to say no, like a, 2-minute synopsis of what you have been kind of consuming as far as advice goes around service and, how to prioritize or how to decide what to say yes or no to?
yeah, so I have a book that I
Ah,
can,
yes.
yes.
Yes,
Lori Weingart,
yes.
one of the authors of this book. This is a great book, and she came and spoke just over a year ago, and I heard her speak to multiple audiences, and she and some other colleagues at Carnegie Mellon mostly have done some research, and this one focuses on the service piece. Um, their research, behavioral research, shows that women are more likely to be asked to do service, women and standouts, people who are
Mm,
underrepresented. Women are in particular more likely to say yes when they're asked, which feeds back into the fact that they're more likely to be asked because I have to staff a committee, so I'm going to go to someone who will agree to do it. And one of the distinctions they make is between promotable and non-promotable tasks. And that kind of motivated some of my earlier comments. Think about things that will actually help your career versus things that some people have called office housework, organizing the party or the barbecue. Probably not going to get you promoted, and it takes a lot of time. So those are some valuable lessons. And so that's one set of topics I've been very attentive to. When I started talking to some of my mentoring groups about this, I checked with a colleague, Christina Fong in management, and she actually teaches this curricula to her students. I think we should teach it to our faculty. It's, how to say no. Her material she sent me had a Warren Buffett quote. The difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything. So there's a whole literature on how to say no. She has something she calls no bingo, where she has her students fill out a bingo card of different ways of saying no to things. And, say no to a stranger or say no to a financial obligation, things like that. Students, when they go through this, they really realize that two things. Number one is it's not the end of the world to say no, right? And that people will actually help you a lot more when you do ask for help, right? I can't do this now, I'm too busy. Oh, well, what else can we take off your plate? So you don't have to go it alone, which I think is another important piece of this. So there's a whole set of resources available on how to say no and when to say no. And I would encourage people to start to pay attention to that.
yeah, thank you.
So,
And the book, just so if people are listening and not
mhm,
watching, The No Club
mhm.
was the book that Jennifer was referencing. Yeah. And I want to acknowledge too that these things are so like it, and I have a couple of blog posts on saying no, and it just sounds so simple. It's so easy to, you know what I
Sounds,
mean? Like this is what you
yeah,
should do and think about
yeah.
this. And in a certain way it is easy. And then in other ways it's so, so difficult. I think especially if, like Diane was saying up front, part of what motivates us is a desire to help, right? And I think that can get us into trouble because at some point, Jennifer, you were talking about when your kids were young or even when they were getting older and not necessarily realizing that you had totally sacrificed yourself. I mean, we're just not able to help as well as we'd like to if we're not in balance, right? And we're not setting those priorities. I will also acknowledge the service piece is tricky. I mean, one of the things I sometimes recommend people think about is what, like, let's assume you're going to have to do some service because usually people have to do something, right? Like, what would you want to do, or what is an area where you feel like, yes, it's really aligned with your interests, maybe it's aligned with your research, maybe it connects you. So for example, I was on a cross-departmental committee within the business school when I was untenured. I was the only untenured person on the committee. We had one representative from each department, and it was to revamp the MBA curriculum when we had a new dean coming in. And it was a really heavy lift. And as you can imagine, also somewhat contentious, and I didn't have tenure, and all of that. And I debated about whether to say yes. And interestingly, in the end, I did say yes. I said I was on it, obviously. I think it may have helped me in ways that I never could have anticipated, because I did not have an easy tenure case. And that committee allowed me to have meaningful, deep connections to faculty and other departments in my school. That's not something I thought about at all when I decided to say yes. I wish I had been that strategic, but it really did pay off. So I think, as you're saying, Jennifer, it's worth even just bouncing ideas, just having a thought partner, a colleague, a senior colleague if you're junior, a peer if you're senior, to really talk through, like, how does this align with what's important to me? Not in a selfish way, what might I gain, right? I mean, we have to consider what are the benefits. It's not selfish to do that. It's selfish to run ourselves ragged and then not be able to help anybody, right? That's the more selfish choice. And frankly, that's the easier choice, because we don't have to make tough decisions. We don't have to say no. Yeah. Diane, you were looking like maybe you had something to add.
Yeah, no, it just does surprise me how, taking on too much service as an assistant keeps happening over and over. And so, I mean, when you were talking, I was thinking, I should go and take the examples. I can see in front of me the report of the P&T committee saying that this person did a ridiculous amount of service as an assistant. And, I almost think we should go and put like the list, this person had this service record at the time of tenure. The committee said this is ridiculous. And so, I mean, just to give people a sense, I can remember as a young assistant myself and reading my annual evaluation, and I would list all these things I did as service, and they would pick one and say, this was good service. And I would think, oh, all these other things I did are worthless. And I think, yes, that it's really true. Why are you spending your time that way? So I think a lot of us are clueless about what really counts and what doesn't. And I think the main message to assistants is internal service. So little is expected from you to get tenure. You do not need a lot of internal service to get tenure. And I would focus time on professional service, and even there being selective. And, of course, if the top journal in your field asks you to review a paper, you should do it. But a lot of other things you can say no. And one last piece of advice is, if you're going to say no right away, so that the person who asks can find somebody else. And the worst case is taking a long time to answer and then saying no can be annoying.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious as to both of your thoughts on this. I mean, it's just raising this question for me that I also often talk to people about, and I remember struggling with it kind of throughout my career, which is this mentality that only research matters and teaching and service are not real work. And I think I suspect we all agree that they are most definitely real work, especially since all of us have served in significant leadership roles it's mostly service, and it is certainly real work. At the same time, I understand what people mean, right? And it aligns a little bit with what you were saying, Diane and Jennifer, about what is promotable, right? What work is promotable. What thoughts do you have, if any, on kind of that tension, between not beating yourself up. You don't want to spend a whole day teaching, leave and feel like I did no real work today. That doesn't make sense, right? At the same time, you don't want to overinvest to the point of it, impacting negatively what you really will be evaluated on, which is your research output. Any thoughts on that? Either of you?
Well, I think that those kinds of boot camps that have you do time diaries and really understanding where you're spending your time has some merit. I think that, just getting a sense for, are you over-investing? Well, I think when you look back at your week and you see you spent all these hours, updating your slides for class, makes you think, okay, well, maybe that wasn't the best use of my time to, my slides were probably fine and isn't going to be the difference between getting, super high ratings and not. So I think we can surprise ourselves in terms of how we spend our time and just aligning that better with what's promotable. And then using that to reflect on and think about the next time you have to make those kinds of decisions about whether you're going to, how you're going to spend your day.
Yeah. Jennifer?
Well, yeah, I have sort of mixed feelings here. I mean, those are the rules of the game, right? And tenure is based on a certain level of competence in service and teaching, and then excellence in research. And at least at many schools, it does vary. So I think it is important to get your guidelines for your school. I knew that, and I'm saying that as someone who was always comparatively better at teaching. I always felt like I was a square peg in a round hole for all sorts of reasons. I guess that's my version of being a standout. So I wrestled with this for a long time. And there are many people, and I agree with Diane, there's good and really good, and how should you be spending your extra time? You don't necessarily need to spend it on perfecting things that are also already excellent. But it's also fun, right? I love my classes, right? And teaching. So I didn't want to abandon it completely. So I don't have a great answer. I have wrestled with that a lot throughout my career. So
I think what you're hitting on is really important. At least it resonates very strongly for me, which is we have to let ourselves do things that we enjoy, right? Because it gives us energy, actually. It helps to fuel us and give us the motivation to then bring to other things that we might not enjoy quite as much, or maybe in that moment, right? And if that means time spent on teaching or time spent mentoring students or whatever it might be, I do think that's important. So even if it's non-promotable, right? Now, there's a difference, though, between doing things that I also did, like revising the font on my slides because they didn't look as good as they maybe could, right? Like that, as Diane, I think, was saying, that we need to let go of, right? Because it doesn't matter. It gives, the nice thing about that is it gives you this little kick, like, oh, I did something, right? And it's much easier than digging into something that's actually hard, like a research project. But I just wanted to emphasize that point, right? If you like it and it lights you up, do you really want to spend a good chunk of your career setting that aside? Probably not, right?
yeah, I'm thinking of a coaching advice I got that it doesn't have to be 110% all the time.
Yeah.
From Elizabeth. Sometimes,
Yes.
80% is perfectly fine, and that's true.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, on the service side, the hard part is you don't really know what's expected. We had a big problem with this in our performance review process, that we have a very good system and it's clear, and most things are articulated, at least for research and teaching. But for service, we talked about if you meet expectations, exceed expectations, or were below average, but nobody had articulated what expectations were. And the chairs would say things like, well, they do everything I ask them, so they meet expectations, which is fine, except that people are not asked to do things in an equitable way. So I went through and I got all the data on what people were doing and which combinations of activities were considered exceeds versus meets versus below. And I remember, I think at one tier, one of the ranks, the average for exceeds expectations was about 150 hours of service. And as I started circulating this, somebody said, you mean that's for each activity, right? This was a service overachiever. And so it was helpful for them to say, oh, it's 150 total and not per activity. And oh, I am doing too much. And that in turn can give you ammunition to potentially say no, or at least to think about yourself. But we just have no idea, like Diane was saying, of how much should you do as an assistant professor? And it's actually not that much for internal service. I remember 20 years ago, a person in our field, it was a woman, and she showed me her tenure package. She did get tenure, but she included a whole page of major service activities. And she pointed she showed me that, and she said, that was another publication, right? If I had not done those things, I could have spent that time on another publication. And that was really a compelling lesson for me, that there is only 24 hours in a day, and the more time you spend on one the less time you have on something else. So
yeah.